The wind pressed hard against the glass walls of the 40th floor conference room, carrying the low roar of downtown Cleveland all the way up into a space designed for people who like to feel above everything. Aurora King stood with her back straight, one hand resting lightly on the edge of the table, the other folded over the cuff of her tailored charcoal blazer. Her gaze was fixed, calm, unblinking, on the man standing across from her. "Do you remember the promise you made me when we were kids?" or she asked. Malik Johnson froze. He had walked into this meeting expecting talk of renovation budgets, load-bearing columns, and punch lists. He expected PowerPoint slides and carefully rehearsed smiles. Not this, not her, and definitely not that question. For a second, the city lights reflected in the glass seemed brighter than the winter sun behind them. The air felt thinner, like the room had climbed another 10 stories without moving. He shifted his weight, fingers tightening around the rolled-up blueprints in his hand, suddenly unsure what to do with his arms, his voice, his eyes. Aurora didn't look away. Her stare had the kind of stillness that came from years of standing her ground in boardrooms full of men who were certain she didn't belong. The kind of look that could make someone feel seen and judged in the same heartbeat. Malik drew in a careful breath, as if even the sound of his lungs might disturb the fragile space between them. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said quietly. But he did. Buried somewhere under a decade of overtime shifts, relocation packages, and performance reviews, there was a memory he never completely managed to kill. A cracked driveway, a crooked backyard swing, a girl with tired eyes and a brave smile, and a cheap plastic ring from the candy machine at the corner store. He wasn't about to admit any of that. Not here. Not to the woman who now ran Kingline Developments, one of the most powerful urban redevelopment companies in the Midwest. Aurora's expression flickered in the smallest way, just enough that anyone who had known her before the glass towers, before the magazine covers, before the friendly fire of corporate politics, would have recognized the old hurt pushing against the surface. "It's all right, Malik," she said softly. "It's been a long time." She turned away first, giving him a clean exit from the moment, but it was far too late. The room had already shifted. He felt it. She felt it. The past had slipped under the door and taken a seat at the table, and neither of them could pretend it wasn't there anymore. Hours earlier, when Malik drove into Cleveland, the skyline had looked foreign, familiar shapes, strange feelings. He told himself he'd never come back, not after Chicago, not after months of being applauded in public and quietly sidelined in private. The meetings where his ideas were praised but never chosen, the projects that always seemed to go to someone who looked more traditional on a brochure. It had taken him too long to realize what he really was to that firm. Not an up-and-coming structural engineer, a checkbox, diversity on the website, optics in the lobby. So he walked away before they could call it a promotion, dignity intact, confidence bruised. His older sister, Layla, met him at her front door with a hug that nearly cracked his ribs and a pot of beef stew already simmering on the stove. She scolded him for not calling sooner, then pressed a bowl into his hands and told him to sit down. Cleveland wasn't glamorous. It didn't care who he'd presented to in Chicago. It didn't know his LinkedIn headline, but it was honest. Neighbors still shouted greetings across porches. Kids still rode bikes in circles until the streetlights came on. Churches still doubled as community centers when the city forgot certain neighborhoods existed. He needed that. So when a mid-sized contracting firm reached out about a restoration job, a historic community center from the 1920s that had fallen into disrepair, he said yes almost immediately. A simple project, he thought. Straightforward work, good bones, a decent paycheck, nothing messy. He didn't know the client was Aurora King. He didn't know she'd come back too. And he definitely wasn't prepared for what seeing her again would do to him. Back in the conference room, Aurora moved to the long table where the plans were spread out in careful precision. She gestured to a section of the drawings with a manicured finger. "Your proposal is the strongest we've reviewed," she said, her voice sliding back into CEO mode so cleanly it almost erased the intimacy of what she'd just asked him. "Your revisions respect the original Art Deco structure and still bring the building up to code." My board responded well. Malik nodded, forcing his mind back to steel, concrete, and math. "I appreciate that," he answered. It's a good building. It deserves better than a cosmetic facelift. Something softened at the corner of her mouth. I agree. She straightened one of the pages, more to control her own hands than because it needed straightening. I'd like you on the main contractor team, she continued. This project matters to me. The way she said it made Malik pause. Matters how? He asked. Her eyes dipped toward the rendering of the old community center, the faded brick facade, the tall arched windows that looked tired and proud at the same time. It was the heart of the neighborhood once, she said. I'd like it to be again. He studied her profile, the line of her jaw, the slight tension at her temple. It sounded noble, but he'd seen enough corporate community projects to know better. Companies wrap themselves in language like that all the time. Legacy, impact, revitalization, while quietly pushing out the very people whose stories they claim to honor. He wasn't ready to trust that. Not the boardrooms, not the brand emblazoned across the top of the tower, not even her. Especially not her. Because long before King Line Developments was plastered across downtown, long before Aurora's face appeared in business magazines, Malik's mother used to scrub the floors of her family's old house twice a week. He used to sprint through their backyard barefooted, weaving between laundry lines and rose bushes, acting like he belonged there because the girl who lived inside insisted he did. He'd loved that house. He'd loved those Saturdays. And then one day, they stopped. I'll think about it, he said now, knowing full well that was just a polite way of saying no. Aurora nodded slowly, as if she'd expected the lie. Make your decision carefully, she replied. This project doesn't just matter to the board, or to me. It matters to a lot of people who've already had too much taken from them. She walked him to the glass door, her heels sharp against the stone floor. When she opened it, she paused, her voice dipping just enough that the words were meant for him and no one else. And Malik, he turned. Whatever you remember, she said quietly, or don't remember about the past, I'm still glad you're here. It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't nostalgia. It was heavy, honest, dangerous. He nodded once and left, stepping out into the cold Cleveland air, shoving his hands deep into his jacket pockets, as if that could keep all the old ghosts from grabbing hold. Cars honked somewhere down the block. A street vendor's cart hissed with roasting peanuts, sending sweet, warm smells into air that tasted like snow. A bus rumbled by, shaking loose a few stubborn brown leaves from the trees along the sidewalk. None of it grounded him. He kept hearing her voice. Do you remember the promise you made me when we were kids? He shouldn't remember, not really, not clearly. But he did. He remembered Aurora King at 14. Too smart, too lonely, trying not to let anyone see how much her mother's illness was draining the light out of her. He remembered the way her laugh sounded when it escaped. Real, sudden, bright, like sunlight hitting skin after days of gray. He remembered tugging on her sleeve in the middle of that overgrown backyard, kneeling dramatically in the patchy grass, holding up a red plastic ring he'd won for $0.25 from the corner store machine. When I grow up, he'd said, heart pounding so hard he felt it in his ears, I'm going to marry you so you don't ever have to feel that sad again. She'd laughed, not the careful little laugh she wore now for shareholders and journalists, but the kind that tipped her head back and made her eyes squeeze shut. Okay then, she'd replied, breathless. It's a promise. Malik leaned against his truck now, eyes closed briefly, feeling the weight of a ring that no longer existed press against a palm that had learned to hold heavier things. He was a grown man. Life had taken the naive out of him with both hands. There was no room for promises made by 10-year-olds in a world of liability reports and insurance adjusters. And yet, as he looked up at the tower of King Line Developments, at the polished glass and steel bearing her family name, he felt something he hadn't expected. A pull. Not romantic. Not exactly. More like unfinished business. More like responsibility. He drove back to Layla's place with soft jazz playing on the radio, the kind his mother used to hum while scrubbing other people's sinks. By the time he pulled into the driveway, the neighborhood had settled into evening. Porch lights on, someone grilling even though it was too cold, the distant thump of a basketball against cracked asphalt. Safe. Familiar. He dropped his keys in the chipped ceramic bowl by the door, and without thinking, slipped a hand into his pocket. His fingers closed around nothing, but his mind supplied the phantom weight of a plastic ring. Why did she have to remember that? He muttered under his breath. But he knew why. Because the past wasn't done with either of them, and neither was the truth. The next morning, the historic community center loomed in front of him like a tired old giant trying to straighten its spine. Brick faded, windows clouded with dust, steel bones aching from decades of neglect. It had once been the heartbeat of the neighborhood, a place for union meetings, wedding receptions, Sunday recitals, community vigils. Now it sagged under the weight of being forgotten. Work worth doing, Malik murmured as he scanned the perimeter. Work that actually matters. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood and old paper. A handful of workers stood around with coffee cups, jackets half zipped, boots stomping dust into new patterns. Conversations died down briefly when he walked in. Eyes flicked toward him, measuring. Curious, not hostile, not warm either. "You the Johnson guy, right?" a voice drawled behind him. "The diversity hire." Malik felt every muscle in his back go still. He turned slowly. A man in his late 40s stood there with a crooked safety vest and a permanent smirk. Pale, thin lips. The kind of face that always looked amused, especially when nothing was funny. "Structural engineer," Malik said evenly. "Lead consultant for this phase of the restoration." Right, the man replied, waving a dismissive hand. "Just calling it like the folks upstairs do. They're real proud of you, you know. New guy, big promotion, lucky jump." Someone snickered quietly by the scaffolding. Malik didn't bite. Years of navigating comments like that had taught him one thing clearly. Your reaction becomes part of the story they tell about you. He refused to give them extra lines. Instead, he walked deeper into the main hall, his boots echoing against cracked mosaic tiles that still held echoes of dancing feet. He was here for a building, not for their approval. A door creaked open behind him. "Good morning, everyone." Aurora's voice floated in like the first chord of a song. Her heels clicked lightly as she stepped inside. Perfect posture, black coat opened just enough to show the sharp line of her suit. The room straightened around her without realizing it. Conversations quieted. Even the man with the crooked vest adjusted his helmet. She moved through the space easily, asking about the temporary heating, checking whether the lighting had been rigged safely, using people's names when she addressed them. Not a distant owner flying in for photo ops. Not just that, anyway. She took in details, the way good leaders and dangerous opponents did. When her eyes landed on Malik, something about her softened for a fraction of a second. "Malik," she said, "walk with me." He followed her down a corridor into the old auditorium. Sunlight filtered through tall, arched windows, catching the dust in the air and turning it into slow-moving glitter. Rows of wooden seats faced a stage that sagged under the weight of forgotten performances. "My father used to bring me here," Aurora said, stepping onto the stage. "Every other Sunday after church. He said this room was proof that people who had nothing still created joy." Malik glanced up at the peeling paint, the half-broken chandeliers. "A lot of folks still feel that way," he replied, "even if they haven't been inside in years." "Yes," she said quietly. "That's why this has to be done right, and why I wanted you specifically." He leaned against a cracked column, folding his arms. "You barely recognized me yesterday," he said. "Maybe at first," she replied, a faint smile touching her mouth. "But once you started talking about the structure, once I saw how you looked at the plans, I knew." Her voice dropped, becoming less CEO, more Aurora. "And Malik, I know what some people at King Line think. I know what they whisper about you getting this role." He snorted softly. "I've heard worse than whispers. I can't control every conversation that happens behind closed doors," she said. "But I want you to know, I trust your work." The words landed heavier than he expected. Trust, not like, not appreciate, not endorse. Trust. "I appreciate that," Malik answered. "But trust doesn't stop politics from doing what politics does." "No," she admitted, "but it's where I start." Before he could answer, the sound of expensive shoes on old wood sliced into the room. Samuel Hart, gray hair perfectly combed, navy overcoat far too polished for a construction site, appeared in the doorway. Aurora's lead board member, King Line's unofficial gatekeeper. "Ms. King," he said, carefully polite, "didn't realize you were giving private tours." "I'm reviewing progress," Aurora replied, her jaw tightening by a millimeter. Hart's gaze slid to Malik, cool, assessing. "I assume Mr. Johnson is acclimating," he said. "These historic properties can be tricky for contractors who aren't used to projects of this scale." "I've worked on high-rises and landmark restorations in Chicago," Malik said evenly. "I'll manage." "Of course," Hart replied, tone dripping with patronizing agreement. "Samuel," Aurora cut in, her voice crisp now, "Malik's assessments are the reason we advanced this phase ahead of schedule. I approved the decision myself." Hart's smile thinned. "Naturally. Just remember, Aurora, the board expects caution. We can't afford any missteps. The public is watching." He left as smoothly as he'd come, the smell of expensive cologne lingering in the dust. When he was gone, Aurora let out a breath she hadn't wanted him to see. "He doesn't like change," she said, "or people who remind him the rules were written for him, not for everyone." "People like you," Malik said. She looked at him. "People like us," she corrected. He didn't argue. He didn't agree out loud either, because the truth was, he had no idea where he fit in her world. Not yet. Hours later, after walking every corridor, after noting every rotten beam and questionable weld, Malik found himself back at Layla's kitchen table, blueprints spread out beneath a cheap hanging lamp. He circled problem areas in red, scribbled notes in the margins, and saved photos to an external drive. The more he dug into the building's bones, the more it became clear. Somebody had been cutting corners long before his name appeared on any contract. Electrical shortcuts, sloppy reinforcement, inspections that were signed off, but clearly never done. Was it laziness? Corruption? He couldn't tell yet, but he knew one thing. If anything went wrong from this point on, the easiest story to tell would be that the new black engineer from out of town messed up. He wasn't giving anyone that story. When his eyes finally burned from staring at drawings, he stepped outside to catch his breath. Snow had begun to fall in slow, lazy flakes. Layla's porch light cast a gold circle on the front steps. She joined him a minute later, wrapping a cardigan tighter around her shoulders. "You look like you've been arguing with ghosts," she said. "Something like that," he murmured. "You gonna tell me why your brow's doing that angry triangle thing?" He gave her the short version. Aurora, the building, the board, the old promise he refused to think about. Layla listened quietly, arms folded, gaze sharp in the way only big sisters mastered. "You know what your problem is?" she said finally. "I'm sure you're about to enlighten me. You keep running away from places that need you because you're afraid they'll chew you up," she said. "And sometimes they will. But sometimes, little brother, you're the one person built to stand in the fire and not burn the way they expect." "I am tired of being the one who has to fix things I didn't break," he admitted. "I know," her voice softened. "But you're also the one who keeps saying you want your work to mean something. Well, meaning hurts. It costs. You don't get legacy without bruises." He didn't answer. "And that girl," she added, eyebrow arched, "the one who kept a plastic ring for 3 summers straight? Don't pretend she doesn't matter just because your pride got older." "That was a long time ago," he said. "So was that promise," Layla replied. "Funny how we're back here anyway." Later that night, after she'd gone to bed, Malik sat alone in his truck outside the now silent community center. He watched snow gather on the steps, on the rusted railing, on the roof that groaned under decades of weather and neglect. He thought of Aurora, head resting against her steering wheel for those few quiet seconds before she pulled away from the site earlier that evening, shoulders sagging under a weight no tailored blazer could hide. Without fully understanding why, he grabbed his small notepad, tore out a sheet, and wrote a single line. "If you ever need someone to drive you home, instead of staying in the parking lot alone, I'm around. No questions. M." He waited until the lot was empty, then walked over to her black sedan and tucked the note under her windshield wiper. The wind bit at his cheeks. Snow stung his ears. He had no idea what, exactly, had just shifted inside him. He only knew this. He wasn't ready to sign her partnership contract, but he was no longer sure he could walk away either. Something unseen, older than the building, older than his resentment, older even than the plastic ring, had pulled them both back to the same ground, and whatever waited beneath it was starting to move. If this first part already stirred something in you, the memory of a childish promise, the sting of being underestimated, or the pull of unfinished business, stay with this story. In the next chapter, Malik steps deeper into a project that's more dangerous than anyone admits, and the quiet war around Aurora's legacy begins to show its true face. Aurora found the note before she found her resolve. The next morning, the wind knifed across the downtown parking deck as she stepped out of her car, chin tucked into the collar of her navy coat. She moved on muscle memory, bag over shoulder, keys in hand, mental list already unspooling. Board check-in at 9, site review at 10, investor call at 2. Then she saw it. A small, folded scrap of paper tucked beneath her windshield wiper, edges damp with melted frost. For a split second, her heart tripped. Threat, she thought. A nasty headline. Another anonymous complaint from someone who disliked seeing her face across King Line's annual reports. She almost ignored it. Almost. Aurora slid the paper free and unfolded it with cold fingers. Her eyes moved quickly over the familiar, uneven handwriting. If you ever need someone to drive you home instead of staying in the parking lot alone, I'm around. No questions. Aaron Murray. The breath left her chest in a quiet, startled rush. She remembered the night before, how she'd sat in her car outside the community center, forehead resting on the steering wheel, counting each inhale to keep from crying in front of the building her father had once called his second church. She thought she was alone. Apparently, she hadn't been. For the first time in longer than she liked to admit, something in her unclenched. Not fully, not safely, but enough that the world sharpened back into focus. The tower didn't feel quite so high. The day ahead didn't seem quite so impossible. She slipped the note carefully into the inside pocket of her coat. By the time Malik pulled into the construction lot, cold air scraping at his cheeks, the building greeted him with a long, uneasy groan. The scaffolding rattled just slightly, enough for his instincts to fire. He stepped out, scanning the perimeter, checking the padlocks without touching them, letting his eyes adjust to the gray morning light. The east service door looked normal. The windows were intact. No glass, no forced entry. Still, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. Inside, the crew was easing into motion. Coffee cups clinked. Someone cursed at a stubborn generator. Luis, the youngest electrician on the team, nodded at him with a tentative kind of respect that hadn't been there the day before. "You hear?" Luis asked quietly when Malik drew near. "The lady at the top? She's coming by again." "The CEO?" Malik said, though he already knew the answer. Luis grinned. "That's the one. People work straighter when she's around. Even Hart shuts up a little." Malik filed that away. Power didn't just sit in boardrooms. It walked through dust and checked sagging beams without flinching. Aurora, for better or worse, had decided to walk here. He was still reviewing stabilization notes in the makeshift site office when he felt her presence before he heard her voice. The air shifted, then the doorway filled with navy wool, dark curls pulled into a low twist, and eyes that had clearly not slept much. "Do you have a minute?" she asked. He nodded and followed her into the west corridor. Dust motes spun between them in the thin strip of winter light. "I want to talk about the partnership contract," she said without preamble. There it was. He'd been waiting for it, dreading it, pretending he wasn't. She handed him a folder. King Line's logo stared back at him like a dare. He didn't open it. Instead, he watched her. The controlled movement of her hands, the slight tightness around her mouth, the way her shoulders were pulled just a bit higher than usual. "Aurora," he said, "I'm not sure this is the right move." Her jaw flexed almost imperceptibly. "Why?" she asked. "You know why. Say it." He hated how easily she could still push him toward honesty. "Because men like Hart think I'm here to make your board pictures look progressive," he said. "Because when something goes wrong, I'm the easiest story. The new black guy from out of town got in over his head. Because I've been the checkbox before, and I'm not interested in being anybody's shield." Aurora's fingers tightened over the folder. Not offense, frustration. At him, at herself, At a system neither of them built, and both were trapped inside. "Malik," she said quietly, "you are not a shield. You're the most qualified engineer who's walked into this project since I took it on. That doesn't matter to the board." "It matters to me," she replied. The way she said it stopped him. It wasn't a line. It wasn't an appeal to ego. It was a risk, spoken out loud. "That's not always enough," he murmured. "No," she admitted, "but it's the only place I know how to start." He weighed the folder in his hand. It felt heavier than paper should. "I can't sign this," he said finally. "Not yet." The words hit her like a cold gust. She absorbed it without flinching. "I understand," she answered. She didn't argue, didn't beg, just took the folder back with a small nod, as if accepting a cost she'd already calculated. They reached the main hall just as Jensen waved them over to the north wing. "We've got something you both should see," he called. The group gathered beneath a row of steel beams tucked behind temporary scaffolding. Malik's flashlight traced a line along a weld seam he'd flagged the day before. It looked wrong, not just old, not just tired. Wrong. He crouched, fingers brushing the metal, feeling the subtle, traitorous give beneath what should have been solid. "This weld won't hold a full load," he said quietly. "Not with the additional weight from the new HVAC system." "Wasn't this section reinforced last winter?" Aurora asked. Jensen nodded, nervous. "Signed off by a contractor named Hollins," he said. "Hart brought his firm in before you approved the current phase." Malik exhaled slowly. Hollins. He'd heard the name in Chicago. The kind of contractor who knew how to win bids, make budgets look neat, and hide whatever he didn't want inspectors to notice. Aurora's face hardened. "This was deliberate," she said. "Or careless," Malik replied. "Either way, it's dangerous. And whoever signed off on it is still on your payroll." Aurora turned to Jensen. "I want every file related to Holland's construction on my desk by the end of the day," she said. "Every invoice, every inspection, every email." Jensen swallowed. "Yes, ma'am." When he and Aurora stepped away, Malik lowered his voice. "If that beam fails, it won't just delay the project. It could take part of the second floor with it." She didn't speak for a moment. When she did, her voice was controlled, but something in it almost cracked. "We'll fix it," she said, "and we'll find out who thought they could cut corners with my father's building." He heard the slip. My father's building. Not just a project, not just a line item. Legacy. "What aren't you telling me?" he asked. Aurora looked up at the high windows, at the pale winter light stretching across the ruined balcony. This center was his obsession the last year of his life, she admitted. He called it the one promise King Line hadn't broken yet. After he died, the board shelved the restoration, said the numbers were wrong. "I thought they just lacked vision." "Now I'm not so sure." Before he could respond, his phone buzzed with a notification, a calendar reminder he didn't remember setting. "Meet Layla, advice." He frowned. "I didn't," he started. Aurora tilted her head. "Didn't what?" "Nothing," he said. "Just my sister trying to be psychic again." Later that afternoon, Layla showed up at the site without waiting for an invitation, an oversized scarf wrapped around her neck, amusement already dancing in her eyes. "You texted me for advice," she said, shrugging. "Figured I'd bring it in person." "I didn't text you," Malik replied. She held up her phone. The screen showed his name, the words, "Need your thoughts. Come by the center." He stared at it. Someone had used his name to bring her here. "Then the universe really wants you to hear me out," she said. And that was somehow more unsettling than if he'd actually sent the message. They stood in the side lot as snow flurried down, dusting the dumpsters and the chain-link fence. He told her the rest. About Hollins, about Hart, about Aurora's contract and that weld that looked like a lie waiting to become a headline. "And the girl?" Layla asked. "Or should I say the woman with the glass tower and the childhood promise?" "Don't start," he said. She didn't listen. "Do you still care about her?" she asked bluntly. He opened his mouth to deny it, then closed it again. He wasn't sure what word fit. Care wasn't simple anymore. It had grown thorns mixed with anger, admiration, fear. "I care about this building," he said instead. "About not letting people like Hart turn it into another luxury box that no one from this neighborhood can afford to step inside." Layla nodded slowly. "Then maybe," she said, "this isn't about being her hero or Making good on some kid promise? Maybe it's about not breaking a promise you made to yourself, to build something that actually helps us, not just them. The wind whipped harder. The building groaned again. That tired, aching sound Malik was beginning to recognize as something more than structure. "I'm tired, Lai," he said, "of fighting systems that bend but never break." "I know," she answered, "but you're here anyway." That night, Malik spread every drawing, every photo, every note across his kitchen table. He started a separate folder on his laptop labeled Center. Evidence, dates, times, names, inconsistencies. Around 10, his phone lit up. Unknown number. He debated ignoring it, then opened the message. "Stop digging. Learn your place." He stared at the text for a long time, thumb resting on the screen. Another bubble appeared. "You won't be able to protect her." A chill slid down his spine that had nothing to do with the draft whistling under Layla's back door. He took a screenshot, saved it to 3 different drives, forwarded it to an email account Hart didn't know he had. Then he whispered to himself, barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator, "Watch me." Sleep came late and thin. The next morning he arrived at the center before sunrise. The padlock on the east service door dangled open. Not broken, not cut, just open. His heart slammed once, hard. He stepped inside, every sense strung tight. The air was too still, too cold. His boots echoed differently, like the building was holding its breath. Fresh footprints cut through the dust toward the north wing. Halfway down the corridor, his flashlight caught a gleam on the floor. A tool bit, industrial grade, not from their supply. He pocketed it. When he reached the suspect beam, his stomach clenched. Someone had smeared a thin layer of compound over the flawed weld. A rushed attempt to conceal, not repair. He didn't know whether the intent was to hide his previous photos or to make the failure more sudden later. Either way, it was sabotage. A faint thud sounded above him, heavy, deliberate. On the second-floor landing, Malik drew a slow breath. "I don't want trouble," he called, voice steady. "But if you're compromising the structure, you're risking lives, including mine." Silence. Then a shadow shifted along the railing above. Broad shoulders, work boots, a tool bag slung over one arm. Not a face he recognized from the crew. "Lives don't matter when the deal's already closed," a low voice replied. "Whose deal?" Malik asked. The figure chuckled, a humorless, practiced sound. "Let's just say some people stand to gain when this place comes down," he said. "You? You're just a complication." "Hart?" Malik said. "Hollins?" The man's silence was an answer in itself. "If that beam fails while workers are in here, you're not just cutting a deal. You're committing murder," Malik said. "No one said anything about bodies," the man replied. "But accidents happen." He tossed something small over the railing. It clattered at Malik's feet. A demolition wedge, a tool used to stress weak joints. "You keep digging, Johnson," the man said softly. "Sooner or later, the ground's going to open up under you." By the time Malik reached the stairs, the second-floor door was swinging shut, cold air slicing into the hall. The man was gone. Workers began filing in minutes later, oblivious to the conversation that had just threaded itself through the building's bones. Luis spotted Malik's face and frowned. "You okay, man? You look like you saw a ghost," he said. "Not a ghost," Malik answered. "The kind of guy who makes ghosts." He didn't tell Aurora yet. Not until she arrived, coat buttoned to her throat, eyes already sharp from whatever she dealt with that morning at King Line's tower. "We need to talk," he said as soon as she stepped into the hall. Her gaze flickered over him, checking for injuries before she even realized she was doing it. "Are you hurt?" she asked. "No," he said, "but the building almost is." He told her everything. The open lock, the footprints, the tampered beam, the man on the landing, the wedge now sitting on his desk. By the time he finished, Aurora's hands were clenched so tightly around her folder that the leather creaked. "This is beyond internal politics," she said quietly. "This is criminal. Which means if we go straight to the board with just what we have, Hart will bury us," Malik said. "We need proof no one can erase." Aurora's eyes hardened into something he'd only seen once before. On the day of her father's funeral, when she stood in front of a room full of people and promised that no one would dismantle what he'd built. Then we start digging somewhere they forgot to clean, she answered. Where? He asked. Her gaze shifted toward the stairwell that led down, beyond the mechanical room, into the guts of the building. Where my father kept the things he didn't trust the board with, she said, in the records they swore didn't exist. The building creaked softly, as if it knew what they were about to ask of it. And as they walked toward the basement, shoulder to shoulder, the uneven ground between them began to feel less like a gap and more like a trench they were choosing to cross together. The door to the record storage room looked like nothing, just chipped gray paint, an old metal plate that read "Authorized Personnel Only," and a lock that had stubbornness built into it. They said this was emptied years ago, Aurora murmured. Digital archives, clean transition, nothing to see. She held up a small ring of tarnished keys, heavy and familiar. These were my father's, she said. I found them in a box of his things last month. Hart told me they didn't open anything anymore. She chose one that looked as old as the building itself and slid it into the lock. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a reluctant groan, the mechanism turned. Cold air rushed out, sharper than the temperature in the hallway. Malik switched on his flashlight and stepped inside. Shelves. Row after row of metal shelves, stacked with boxes, binders, rolled blueprints bound with dry rubber bands. Dust lay thick on everything, except one shelf at eye level, where a neat line of boxes sat almost clean. Someone's been in here, he said. Aurora's shoulders stiffened. They told me this room was sealed, she replied, that my father's notes were all transferred to the company servers. Looks like somebody only transferred what they wanted to keep, Malik said. They split up. Aurora moved toward the back wall, where older ledgers sat in faded cardboard. Malik went for the suspiciously clean shelf. He slid out a box labeled 1998-1999, Maintenance and Contracts. His flashlight beam skimmed across the pages inside. Half the entries were present, half were cleanly torn out. Here, he called. Aurora joined him, taking the ledger. Her eyes caught on a line written in familiar handwriting. Thin, angular, precise. Stopped payment to Hollins until independent inspection. Something is wrong with his numbers. RK. Her throat tightened. He knew, she whispered. My father knew something was off with Hollins. And the board kept paying anyway, Malik said. Or someone did. Aurora flipped to the final page. The last entry, half finished, ended with 3 words. If anything happens. The rest was gone, sliced out with a blade. For a moment she couldn't breathe. You don't know that those things are connected, she said automatically, fighting the crack in her voice. My father had heart problems. There are a dozen rational explanations. I'm not saying they did anything to him, Malik interrupted gently. I'm saying he was trying to stop them from bleeding this place, and they either ignored him or pushed him aside. She closed her eyes briefly, pulling herself together with visible effort. This isn't about what they did to him, she said. It's about what we're going to let them do to this building. They pushed deeper into the room. Another cabinet in the corner bore a rusted lock that none of her keys fit. Step back, Malik said. One sharp shove of a pry bar, and the metal snapped. Inside were folders stamped confidential. Board use only. Aurora's hands trembled just slightly as she lifted the first one. Email printouts, memos, handwritten notes. She scanned a page, then handed it to Malik, her face pale. The thread showed arguments between her father and 2 former board members. The subject line, Hollins Construction, Performance and Invoices. Her father's last line, I will not sign off on fraudulent work. The community center is not a shell company. The date was 6 months before he died. Aurora leaned against the cabinet, knuckles white. All this time, she murmured, I thought they shelved the project because they didn't believe in it, because I was too junior to convince them, but they were covering their own theft. Not all of them, Malik said. Those 2 are gone. Someone else kept Hollins around. Someone who likes money more than they fear legacy. Hart, she whispered. Before he could answer, a faint sound drifted down from above. A rhythmic, metallic tap. Not quite a hammer, not quite a drill. They froze. Someone else is here, Malik said. Aurora snapped the cabinet closed and they slipped out of the records room, pulling the door softly behind them. In the dim hallway, the building's usual creaks felt amplified. The sound above them stopped, then shifted, moving overhead toward the south wing. We should call security, Aurora whispered. And tell them what? Malik countered. That the same people who tried to hide these files have suddenly grown a conscience? They climbed the stairs, staying close to the wall. The hallway on the first floor was empty. The exit door at the far end was ajar, snow blowing in around the frame. Whoever had been there was gone. For now. We have enough to force an internal review, Aurora said, watching Malik load 2 boxes of files into his truck an hour later. The old invoices, my father's note, the maintenance contracts. It may not prove sabotage yet, but it exposes a pattern. It also paints a target on your back, Malik replied. Too late, she said. They started aiming the minute I reopened this site. He locked the case in the trunk, turned and found her watching the building instead of him. You know what he used to say about this place or not? She asked. Your father? She nodded. He said walls have memories, Aurora replied. They remember who fought to keep them standing and who got rich letting them crack. Then I hope they're paying attention, Malik said. She looked at him then, really looked, as if trying to see the boy who'd once knelt in her backyard, holding a plastic ring like it was a crown. Promise me something, she said quietly. Whatever comes next, you don't go through it alone. Not when they've already shown they're willing to play dirty. He held her gaze. Only if you promise the same, he answered. Her lips twitched into the faintest smile. Deal. Otrum. Neither of them noticed the dark sedan idling half a block away, engine low, windows tinted. The figure behind the glass wasn't watching the door. They were watching the 2 people walking out of it together. The next day, the war stopped pretending to be quiet. It began in the security room. The space was barely bigger than a walk-in closet, lined with monitors and cables, the air stale with old coffee and overheated electronics. Malik sat at the main console while Aurora stood behind him, arms folded tight. Camera logs? She asked. He nodded, fingers flying across the keyboard. Whoever broke in the other morning, they didn't know about the backups, he said. If we're lucky, the feed caught them. The footage from 2 nights earlier flickered to life. The grainy black and white image showed the service entrance. At 1:13 a.m., a figure shouldered open the door. Same heavy boots, same tool bag. Malik zoomed as far as the camera would allow. The face was mostly in shadow, but the posture was unmistakable. That's him, he said. Can you enhance it? Aurora asked. Not enough pixels, he answered. But it proves someone who doesn't belong here is moving freely at night. Keep going, she said. He scrubbed forward. At 1:19, another figure stepped into frame. A man in a tailored coat, no hard hat, no reflective vest. Samuel Hart. His face was clear as daylight. The breath left Aurora's chest. Hart, she whispered. The footage showed him handing the unknown saboteur a thick envelope and a folded document. The audio was mostly static, but a few words cut through. Before they know, structurally unsalvageable, fast. That's conspiracy, Malik said quietly, not just negligence. Download it, Aurora said. Now. He clicked through the export menu. An error flashed across the screen. File corrupted, access denied. That's not possible, he muttered. I'm in local admin. He tried again. The file flickered, then vanished from the directory. Aurora stared in disbelief. They're deleting it in real time, Malik said. Somebody with higher privileges is scrubbing the feed while we watch. The only person with higher access than me, Aurora said slowly, is Hart. Silence swelled in the tiny room. So what do we do? Malik asked. Aurora didn't hesitate. We find something they don't know we have, she said, and we stop playing defense. That afternoon, Kingline's board office sent an email. Emergency session, performance review of CEO. The subject line said review. The tone said execution. You can't skip it, Malik said, as they stood in the half-lit main hall. If I don't show up, he wins by default, Aurora replied. And if you walk in without proof, he kills the project and your credibility in one shot. She gave a humorless laugh. He's been trying to do that since I took this role, she said. I'm still here. Because you're better than them, he said. Not because they decided to play fair. She glanced at him, something fragile flickering behind the steel. I have to go, she said, but I won't let them vote on a lie. What if he moved the evidence out of your reach? Malik asked. You saw what he did with the footage. I printed hard copies of the files from the records room last night, she replied. I locked them in my office. Locking things in your office didn't stop them from cleaning the cameras, he said. No, she admitted, which is why I didn't leave everything there. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small flash drive, no bigger than her thumb. This is a full scan of the archive files we recovered, she said. I made it myself. Where are you keeping it? He asked. Her answer was simple and stubborn. On me. The next morning, Cleveland woke under a tight, low sky. The air outside King Line's tower tasted like snow and trouble. Malik parked across the street, far enough to avoid attention, close enough to intervene if his instincts proved right. He watched employees stream through the revolving doors, heads down, badges flashing red, then green. At 7:14 a.m., Aurora stepped out of her car. She looked like a woman going into battle, charcoal coat, hair pinned back, eyes set. But he could see the strain in the line of her shoulders, in the way her hand tightened briefly around the strap of her bag. You didn't have to come, she said when she spotted him. Yes, he replied. I did. They won't let you into the boardroom, she warned. I don't need to be in the room to keep an eye on the exits, he said. She hesitated, then nodded once. Stay close. She disappeared inside. Time stretched. Upstairs, the boardroom's glass walls looked out over a city that didn't care who lost their title today. 12 chairs circled a long, polished table. 11 were filled when Aurora walked in. Samuel Hart stood at the head of the table, hands folded in a practiced pose of concern. Aurora, he said with a sympathetic smile, thank you for coming on such short notice. I don't avoid difficult conversations, she answered, taking her seat. I prefer to have them while the facts are still warm. A few board members shifted uncomfortably. Hart clicked a remote. An image of the community center appeared on the screen, zoomed on the cracked landing of the staircase. This is the north stairwell, he said. Under your supervision, the restoration has encountered repeated structural issues. We have reports of safety violations, cost overruns, concerns from our legal department. Those cracks are the result of tampering, Aurora cut in, by a contractor you insisted we keep. Or, Hart replied smoothly, they are the result of rushing a sentimental project that should have been retired when your father passed. Her fingers curled inward, nails pressing half-moons into her palms. This meeting, Hart continued, is to address the board's concern that your judgment has been compromised by personal attachment. He looked around the table, drawing their discomfort into his orbit. Unless you can provide credible evidence of this so-called sabotage, he said, we have no choice but to consider suspending your authority over the project in your role as CEO. Aurora stood slowly. My father believed that this company answered to more than quarterly reports, she said. He believed we owed a debt to the people whose homes we built, whose neighborhoods we disrupted, whose history we paved over. The community center is not charity. It's an overdue promise. Hart sighed loudly. Emotion is not evidence, he said. Do you have any proof of these allegations against Hollins and myself? Yes, she said, lifting her folder. I have internal invoices, recordings from the security. Her voice stopped. The papers inside were blank, every page. Her pulse crashed in her ears. She flipped through the folder in disbelief. The documents she'd printed, her father's notes, the invoices, the email thread, were gone, replaced with perfectly clean paper. A chill swept through the room. Hart's brows lifted in feigned concern. Is there a problem? He asked. Someone's tampered with my files, she said. I printed evidence last night. Evidence no one has seen but you, he replied gently. Aurora, we're worried about you. This obsession with the center, these accusations against long-standing partners, seeing conspiracies where some would say there are just mistakes. One of the older board members cleared his throat. Maybe time away would help, he said. A leave. For your health. Hart seized the momentum. I move that we suspend Ms. King as CEO pending evaluation, he said. For the good of the company. Hands shifted, eyes flicked. No one looked at Aurora directly. She felt the moment tipping, legacy slipping away under the weight of men who'd never set foot on the center's cracked floor. You don't get to bury the truth because you're afraid of what it costs to face it, she said. Hart ignored her. All in favor. The doors burst open. Technically, security should have stopped him. Technically, barging into a board meeting was a career-ending move. Malik didn't care. He stepped into the room, his presence wrong enough to jolt every person at the table out of their carefully rehearsed expressions. "You have no authorization to be here," Hart snapped. "Security." "Check your bag," Malik said, eyes on Aurora. Her heart hammered. "My... what?" "Your bag," he repeated calmly. "Right now." Hart's face tightened. "This is absurd," he said. "Remove him." "Let her look," one of the quieter board members said, curiosity cracking their composure. Aurora set her bag on the table, hands suddenly clumsy. She unzipped it, pushed aside her planner, her pen case, her wallet. At the bottom lay a small, matte black flash drive she had never seen before. She looked up at Malik. "I found that behind your back tire this morning," he said. "Somebody wanted to make sure it got to you. Figured I'd bring it myself." Hart's color drained a shade. "This is ridiculous," he said. "We can't just plug random devices into our system. For all we know, it's malware." Aurora had already moved to the console. Her fingers shook only slightly as she inserted the drive. The screen behind them flickered. Security footage. The North Wing. The saboteur, in clearer resolution this time, standing beneath the compromised beam. Hart entering the frame with that same envelope and folded document. Their voices came through, faint but distinguishable. "Finish weakening the supports. If the inspectors condemn it, we pivot to demolition by Q3. The land alone is worth more than these sentimental delays." Aurora didn't breathe. The room exploded in whispers. Hart lunged for the console. Malik stepped between them. "Don't," he said. Hart glared at him, then turned his fury on Aurora. "This is doctored," he barked. "Staged. It's a deepfake." "No," one of the senior board members said quietly. "I recognize that hallway, and that timestamp. That was the night you told us the cameras malfunctioned." Another board member, the one who rarely spoke, leaned forward. "Call legal," she said. "Now. An internal audit." Hart, suddenly smaller in the haze of his unraveling control, sputtered. "You're all going to trust a video delivered anonymously over a man who's been here 20 years? Aurora turned to him, spine straight. "No," she said. "They're going to trust a video that matches missing invoices, altered maintenance logs, deleted footage, and a pattern of lies." Her voice sharpened. "And they're going to trust that I will not allow Kingline to profit off a crime." Security arrived moments later, answering a call from someone other than Hart for the first time in years. They didn't cuff him, not yet, but their presence at his elbow was loud enough. "This isn't over," he hissed at Malik as they escorted him out. Malik met his gaze calmly. "It never is," he said. "That's why people like you count on people like me getting tired." Downstairs in the lobby, Aurora stepped out of the elevator like someone who'd survived a storm inside a glass box. Malik was waiting. "You okay?" he asked. "No," she answered honestly, "but I'm still standing." They walked outside together into the brittle midday air. For the first time, the tower behind them felt less like a throne and more like a witness. "I need to go to the center," she said. "The inspectors are coming tomorrow. If there's anything left hidden in that building, I want it found before they arrive." "But I'm not letting you walk into that place alone after what we just exposed," he replied. She didn't argue. She didn't thank him either. She just nodded, like him being there was a fact she'd finally allowed herself to count on. The community center waited for them, quiet under a crust of snow. Inside, the crack on the second-floor landing had widened just enough to be noticed, not enough to fail. Someone had been there again. They found the device in the mechanical room tucked against the foundation, a small metal box wired to a sensor. "Vibration-based destabilizer," Malik said grimly. "Every time the building shakes, this thing nudges the weak points a little further. Enough of these, and an inspector could condemn the place without anyone suspecting foul play." "Can you remove it safely?" Aurora asked. "Yes," he replied, "but we're not destroying it. We're labeling it and handing it to the city as Exhibit A." They worked until dusk, documenting everything. Luis and Jensen joined them, faces sober, loyalty now solid as the bricks around them. When the last photo was taken, the last wire tagged, the last door checked, the building felt calmer, still fragile, still at risk, but finally perhaps seen. They ended up in the old ballroom again, standing where her father had once spun her in slow circles under chandeliers that no longer shone. My father used to tell me stories in this room, Aurora said, about how he and my mother would sneak in here as teenagers after community meetings were over, about how he promised her he'd make sure this place never turned into another parking lot. And you, Malik asked softly, what did you promise in here? She smiled faintly. I promised I wouldn't be one of those rich kids who forgot where she came from, she said. Didn't exactly picture fighting corporate sabotage as part of that. He watched her, the weight of years settling around them. And what about that other promise, he asked. She turned, brows lifting slightly. The one in your backyard, he said. You said you never forgot it. Why did you bring it up? Silence folded over them, thick and careful. When we were 10, she said slowly, you were the only person who didn't treat me like some fragile glass thing just because my mother was sick. You were ridiculous, loud, stubborn. You thought a 25-cent ring could solve heartbreak. I was very committed to my solution, he said. Her smile deepened. You were, she agreed. But that promise, it wasn't about marriage to me. Not really. It was about the idea that someone could see me drowning and decide to stay. Not out of obligation, out of choice. She took a breath. When I saw you in that conference room, she continued, I realized I still cared whether you stayed or walked away. And after everything we've dug up in this building, after what Hart tried to do, I needed to know if anything we promised back then still meant anything to you now. He stepped closer, the scuffed wood floor creaking under his boots. She said, you promised to marry me when we were kids, he murmured, repeating her earlier words. And he asked, does it still matter? Her eyes shone, not with tears exactly, but with something just as vulnerable. Does it? She asked. He held her gaze, all bravado stripped away. It matters that I didn't lie, he said. I meant it then, in the way a 10-year-old can mean anything. I wanted you not to hurt. I wanted you to know you weren't alone. That's still true. His voice dropped. But it doesn't have to look like a ring now, he added. It can look like me standing next to you when boardrooms try to erase you. It can look like us choosing not to run when the easy option is to let them win. She swallowed. Then yes, she whispered. It still matters. A car door slammed outside. The city inspectors had arrived early, their flashlights slicing through the dusk. Aurora straightened. Ready? Malik asked. No, she said, but we're doing it anyway. They walked out together to meet the officials, carrying files, photos, and a small metal device that had been designed to break what they'd just saved. The inspectors listened. They took notes. They measured. They frowned at the sabotage and nodded at the remedial plans. It would take days, weeks, maybe months to unravel the financial rot and prosecute the people who tried to profit from it. But the verdict on the building itself was clear by the time they left. With proper reinforcement, this center is salvageable, the lead inspector said. It deserves to stand. After everyone was gone, the community center hummed in the quiet way old buildings do when they sense their fate has shifted. Aurora and Malik remained in the doorway, looking out at the falling snow. You know, he said, for someone who claims she didn't want to be a symbol, you're quickly becoming the woman who took on her own company. Don't start, she said, but there was no real warning in it. He bumped her shoulder gently with his. Look, he added, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to get tired. People like Hart don't vanish. They regroup. But we also did something your father would have been proud of. She looked back at the ballroom, at the cracks, at the scaffolding that now felt less like a threat and more like a promise. He used to say legacies aren't what you leave in your will, she murmured. They're what you refuse to let other people bury while you're still breathing. Sounds like something Layla would put on a t-shirt, Malik said. She'd sell out, Aurora answered. Night deepened. The streetlights flickered on, draping the building in a soft amber glow. If you want to walk away after this, she said quietly, I'll understand. You didn't sign up for a war. He shook his head. I signed up to fix a building, he said. Turns out the foundation we had to start with was the truth. I'm not done with either. She considered him for a long beat. So, she said, voice gentle now, teasing and sincere at once. You're staying? Yeah, he replied. I'm staying. For the project, she asked. For the community. For Kingline Soul? He glanced at her, eyes warm. For all of that, he said. And for the girl who once said, okay, to a plastic ring, like it was the most serious contract in the world. She laughed softly, the sound echoing in the doorway, brighter than the failing lights. Then I guess, she said, we're finally starting to keep that promise the right way. The story doesn't end with a kiss or a dramatic speech. It ends with two people choosing to show up again the next morning, despite the fatigue, the fear, and the knowledge that the fight will never be as clean as the blueprints they draw. It reminds us that corruption doesn't crumble because someone shouts at it. It cracks because ordinary people refuse to look away, even when it would be easier to go home and forget. It reminds us that childhood promises aren't about fairy tale vows. They're about the first time we decided that someone else's hurt mattered enough to stand beside them. Aurora and Malik don't rebuild the world in a day, but they refuse to let one building fall for profit. They refuse to let one company erase its debt to a neighborhood, and in doing that, they prove something quietly radical. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is come back, stand on the same broken ground, look someone in the eye and say, it still matters, and so do you. 6 months later, the ballroom didn't smell like dust anymore. It smelled like fresh paint and coffee, like new wood and old stories trying on a second life. Malik stood in the middle of the restored hall, head tipped back, watching morning light spill through the cleaned windows in broad, forgiving strokes. The cracked balcony that had once threatened to fall now sat steady, its weight properly distributed, its joints reinforced with steel that would outlive all of them. You're staring like a proud parent, Layla said behind him. He turned. She leaned in the doorway, scarf loose around her neck, eyes soft with a kind of mischief that had grown less biting and more protective over the past months. I'm staring, he said, because I still half expect to hear that old groan every time the wind hits. The building's still talking, she replied, stepping inside. It's just not begging for help anymore. Her footsteps echoed less harshly than they had before the repairs. The floors had been refinished, the worst scars sanded down but not erased. Aurora had insisted on that, keeping some of the old marks visible. Leave proof that this place went through something, she'd said, so people know we didn't just snap our fingers and make it pretty. How is she? Layla asked now, as if reading his mind. Running on fumes, Malik answered, which for Aurora means slightly less sharp than a scalpel and only twice as stubborn as usual. Layla huffed a laugh. Board done with their show trials yet? Mostly, he said. Heart's out. Officially. Internal audit finished last week, and the DA filed charges. Wire fraud, conspiracy, attempted insurance fraud, you name it. First they tried to bury the center, Layla murmured. Now they're going to bury him in paperwork. She didn't say it gleefully, just matter of fact, like gravity. On the far side of the ballroom, a small team adjusted folding chairs. A banner hung above the stage. King Community Center, grand reopening. Hard to believe we're actually doing this, Malik said. No, Layla replied. Hard to believe they almost got away with not doing it. He lowered his gaze to the brand new support columns, the subtle reinforcement beams tucked behind decorative molding. He could see the work because he knew where to look. To everyone else, it would just feel safe. His phone buzzed. A message from Aurora. You here? He typed back. In the ballroom, watching your empire get its final coat of shine. Seconds later, another ping. Don't call it an empire. It's one building. He smiled. One building that almost became a bargaining chip. One building they'd refused to let be sold for parts. Go, Layla said, nudging him. She's going to need someone to remind her to breathe before the cameras show up. He found Aurora in one of the refurbished classrooms, standing alone in front of a bulletin board that was still blank. She wore a deep emerald dress under a dark blazer, hair swept back but softer than it had been on the day she'd walked into the boardroom to defend herself. A thin silver bracelet circled her wrist, her mother's, he knew now. You look like you're about to fire someone, he said gently. She didn't startle. She learned the sound of his footsteps. I was thinking about the first time I sat in this room, she replied. Before any of this. The desks were crooked, the paint was peeling, and some kid had carved their name into the windowsill. Still there? He asked. Yeah, she said. I had them sand around it. She turned to face him, the hint of a smile playing at the corner of her mouth. You ready? She asked. For the speeches? He said. Or for you to pretend you're not terrified of speeches? I'm not terrified, Aurora said. I'm strategically concerned. That's one way to say, I'd rather fight another board coup than talk into a microphone, he replied. Her smile sharpened, then softened again. How bad was it? He asked quietly. After the video. After Hart. She understood the real question. How close did you come to losing everything? Shareholders hate bad press, she said. Half of them wanted to distance the company from the center completely. Shut it down, sell the land quietly, pretend Hart was a one-off mistake. And the other half? He asked. The other half realized there's only so many times you can get caught trying to profit off people's pain before the market notices, she answered. They voted to keep me. Barely. He exhaled slowly. You didn't tell me it was that close, he said. Would you have done anything differently? She asked. He thought about it. No, he said. Would you? Her gaze drifted back to the bulletin board. I've been asking myself that every night, she said. If I'd stepped down, they might have left the center alone, hired some PR firm, slapped their name on a few scholarships, and called it a day. But my father always said the most dangerous lies are the ones you tell yourself to make doing nothing feel noble. She looked at him again. So no, she said. I wouldn't have walked away, even if it meant losing the title. You didn't lose it, he said. You just changed what it means. He hesitated, then added, They offered me something too, you know. Her brow lifted. What? Director of Structural Oversight for all King Line community projects, he said, the words tasting both tempting and heavy. Big budget, big title, bigger target on my back. You didn't tell me that, she said. I wasn't sure I'd say yes, he replied. Didn't want you thinking I was only staying because there was a corner office attached to it. And now, she asked, now I'm thinking about the fact that for the first time in my life, someone wants to pay me to make sure buildings like this don't get turned into weapons, he said, and that someone actually listened when I told the board we needed an independent community advisory council built into the charter. Aurora's lips parted slightly. They agreed? She asked. They did, he said, because you made it non-negotiable. You said no council, no CEO. I said a lot of things in that meeting, she murmured, almost blacked out halfway through. I know, he answered. I was watching through the crack in the door. She laughed, the sound loosening the knot in both their chests. So, she said, are you taking it? He studied her. Only if it comes with one condition, he said. A wary light sparked in her eyes. What condition? That the office they give me is here, he replied, gesturing around the center. Not in the tower. This is where the work matters. The tower's just where people sign the checks. Her shoulders eased. I think we can make that happen, she said. Our new ethics chair owes me at least 3 favors. And one more thing, he added. The Community Advisory Council? I want Layla on it. Paid, not volunteer. She's been doing this work for years while people like Hart got invited to panels for saying equity in sentences full of buzzwords. A proud, almost painful smile pulled at the edge of Aurora's mouth. Consider it done, she said. A murmur of voices drifted down the hallway. The early guests arriving. Reporters, local officials, elders from the neighborhood, children who'd never seen the center open in their lifetime. Aurora took a slow breath. You know what's funny? She asked. What? 6 months ago, I thought being CEO was the most important identity I had, she said. Now I'm more worried about whether the after-school tutoring schedule is going to work for parents who work nights. Akana, that, Malik said, is why you should stay CEO. He offered his arm. Come on, he added. You've got a building to introduce. They stepped into the hallway, moving toward the main entrance. As they neared the lobby, a familiar figure straightened from arranging a stack of programs. Morning, Miss King, the woman said. Mr. Johnson. Miss Hattie wore the same sensible shoes, the same neat uniform she'd worn every night at King Line's headquarters for the past 20 years. The only thing that had changed was the badge on her chest. Facilities Supervisor, King Community Center. Miss Hattie, Aurora said warmly, you didn't have to come in this early. Yes, I did, Miss Hattie replied. Couldn't sleep anyway. Big day. Her gaze lingered on Malik for a beat. You two sure know how to give an old woman heart trouble, she said, sneaking around, digging in files, confronting men who think they own the sky. You knew? Malik asked, startled. She snorted. Baby, I've been emptying trash cans outside boardrooms longer than some of those men have been in suits, she said. You think I didn't hear Hart scheming? I knew something was wrong the day your father, she nodded at Aurora, came out of a meeting looking like the walls had closed in on him. Aurora's throat tightened. Why didn't you say anything? She asked softly. I did, Miss Hattie said, just not to the people who wouldn't listen. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded scrap of paper, edges worn. Malik's breath caught. He recognized the handwriting, the rhythm of the lines. If you ever need someone to drive you home instead of staying in the parking lot alone, I'm around. No questions. I slipped this under your wiper that morning, Miss Hattie said, looking at Aurora. Saw you sitting outside the old center, crying into your steering wheel like the world had ended. Figured if you were brave enough to show up there alone, you might be brave enough to answer when help knocked. Aurora stared at her. I thought Malik wrote that, she said. I took a picture of your plate, asked around, found out who was working the site, Miss Hattie replied. He came to see me the next day. I told him what I'd heard, what I'd seen in the trash, shredded memos, duplicate invoices. He's the one who took it from rumor to evidence. She looked between them, eyes bright. But I started it, she added lightly. 3 little words and a note. Malik frowned. 3 words, he echoed. Miss Hattie smiled. You remind me, she said. The world seemed to pause. You remind me, she repeated, turning to Aurora now, of your father when he was young, of all the folks who thought they could change things before the world taught them to shrink. And you, she nodded at Malik, you remind me of every man I've ever watched get pushed to the back of the room, only to be the one who actually knew where the emergency exits were. Aurora's eyes filled before she could stop them. Miss Hattie, she whispered. You two are why this building's still standing, the older woman said. Don't you forget that when the cameras start flashing and everybody pretends they knew how this was going to end. She patted Aurora's hand, then Malik's shoulder, and shuffled toward the front doors to greet the incoming crowd. Aurora exhaled shakily. So that's where it started, she murmured. 3 words in a lobby, from a woman most of the company never bothered to learn the name of. Millionaires make headlines, Malik said quietly. Women like her keep the stories from ending too soon. They stepped into the main hall. The seats were nearly full now, parents with toddlers on their laps, teenagers in hoodies pretending not to be impressed, elders from the neighborhood sitting straighter than their spines usually allowed. Jensen and Louise stood near the side wall, leaning against a new support column they'd helped install. They straightened when they saw Malik, an unspoken pride passing between them. At the front, a small podium waited. Ladies and gentlemen, the MC called, thank you for joining us for the reopening of the King Community Center. To start, please welcome someone who has known this building longer than most of us have been alive, Mrs. Dolores Green. An elderly woman with a cane made her way to the microphone. Her voice shook at first, then gathered strength. I got married in this room, she said. Watched my children learn to dance in the halls. Watched my husband's casket sit right over there when we said goodbye. When they boarded this place up, it felt like they boarded up our memories too. She pointed her cane gently toward Aurora. That lady right there, she said, could have left it that way, could have said it wasn't her problem. Instead, she came back, and she brought help. She pointed next at Malik. And that man, she continued, looked at walls everybody else said were too far gone and said, not on my watch, the crowd murmured. So when you walk these halls, Mrs. Green finished, remember, this wasn't some rich man's gift. This was a debt paid, late but paid. She stepped back. Aurora's turn. Malik felt her hand brush his as she passed him on the way to the stage. Just a touch. Just enough to say, I'm here. Are you? She stood behind the podium, the microphone a sterile, unblinking eye. Most of you know my last name, she began. You've seen it on the side of buildings, on signs, and news stories you didn't ask to be part of. For a long time, that name meant power to me, influence, deals and deadlines. She paused, letting the quiet settle. But standing in this room, she said slowly, it means something else. It means responsibility. It means knowing my father made promises he didn't get to keep, and deciding that I'm not going to let that be his legacy. She looked out at them. When we started repairing this building, we found rot where there should have been strength, she continued. We found corners cut and signatures forged. We found people who were more interested in profits than in safety. Some of those people sat in rooms with my name on the door. She didn't say Hart's name. She didn't have to. What we also found, she said, was courage in places that rarely get cameras pointed at them. A cleaning woman who refused to ignore what she heard in the trash. Workers who spoke up when something didn't look right, even though that meant risking their jobs. An engineer who could have walked away, but instead walked straight into the fire with me. Her voice wavered, then steadied. Today is not about me, she said. It's not even about my father. It's about you, about the generations that were told this place was too expensive to save, about kids who deserve a space to learn and fail and try again without having to cross 3 buses and a freeway to get there. She leaned in slightly. We almost lost this building, she said, not to time, but to greed. We didn't because enough people decided they were done watching their neighborhoods get treated like expendable backdrops in other people's success stories. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. So here's my promise, Aurora finished. As long as I have any power in this company, we will not use your communities as collateral. We will not bury our mistakes in your foundations. We will not profit off your displacement and call it progress. She looked at Malik, just for a second. And if I ever forget that, she added, I expect you to remind me. Applause rose, not polite, not tentative, but full-throated. People stood. Some wiped their eyes. Children covered their ears, overwhelmed by the noise. Malik felt something expand in his chest he hadn't known was still cramped. Relief, maybe. Or the quiet, fierce satisfaction of having kept something fragile from breaking. Later, when the speeches ended and the ribbon was cut and the news crews packed up their equipment, he found Aurora on the rooftop terrace, coat pulled tight against the cold. Below them, the city stretched out, lights blinking, sirens wailing faintly, life carrying on with no idea how close one neighborhood had come to losing a heartbeat. Nice speech, he said. I didn't throw up, she replied, so I'm calling it a win. He stepped up beside her. Do you ever think about how different this could have gone? He asked. If Miss Hattie hadn't slipped that note, if you hadn't come back to this building, if I'd decided it wasn't my fight. All the time, she said. Then I realized that's the point. What do you mean? He asked. She looked at him, eyes clear despite the wind. They count on those tiny differences, she said. On people being too tired, too scared, too convinced their choices don't matter. Hart didn't need everyone to look away. He just needed enough of us to do nothing. And we didn't, Malik said. No, she agreed. We didn't. Silence settled, comfortable this time. So, he said lightly, where does that leave us? The CEO and the structural guy who knows all her secrets. She smiled. It leaves us with a building that's finally safe, she said. A company on probation with its own conscience. A community that's watching, and 2 people who once made a ridiculous promise in a backyard. He tilted his head. You still thinking about that little ring? He asked. I'm thinking about what it meant, she replied. It wasn't about marriage. It was about a boy who didn't laugh when I said I was scared, who offered to stand between me and every hurt he didn't even understand yet. And now? He asked. Now, she said, I'm standing next to a man who did exactly that, even when the hurt had lawyers and board seats. She took a breath that looked a lot like a leap. So here's my question, she said softly. Not does it still matter? We answered that. My question is, what do we build from here? He thought about the center humming beneath their feet, about kids who'd grow up thinking of this place as normal, not miraculous, about a cleaning woman whose 3 words had set all of this in motion. We build more rooms where people like Miss Hattie don't need courage just to be heard, he said. We build systems that don't collapse the minute someone decides profit is more important than people. We build a life where showing up for each other isn't the exception. It's the baseline. He looked at her. And maybe, he added quietly, we build it together. One contract at a time, one fight at a time, one stupid plastic ring we both still secretly remember at a time. Her laugh came out half sob, half relief. That, she said, is the most engineer romantic answer I've ever heard. I can draw you diagrams, he said, color-coded and everything. I'll hold you to that, she replied. They stood there until the cold finally drove them back inside, back into a building that had gone from liability to landmark because ordinary people refused to accept the story they were handed. And if you're listening to this wondering what any of it has to do with you, here's the part you might not want to hear. Most of the time, the villains don't look like movie villains. They look like respectable men in good suits explaining why a project just isn't feasible right now. Most of the time, the heroes don't look like superheroes. They look like janitors who've seen too much, cleaning staff who read the memos nobody else bothers to shred properly, engineers whose warnings get talked over until something almost breaks. What saved this building wasn't a miracle. It was a cleaning woman slipping a note under a windshield. It was a daughter refusing to let her father's promise die in a boardroom. It was a man who was tired of fighting, but fought anyway. So the next time you walk into a polished lobby or past a boarded-up community center the city keeps meaning to get to, ask yourself a simple, dangerous question. Am I going to be one more person who shrugs and walks away? Or am I going to be the one who quietly, stubbornly decides it still matters? And I do too.